All right, everybody, a quick special pod to cover something happening at the Texas State Capitol that well over half of Texans really need to know about. We've been kind of buried in voucher talk at the Capitol over the last couple of days. But this is a very directly impactful bill that is making its way through the process at the Capitol that directly affects you if you are a renter. We are joined by Mark Melton and Stuart Campbell, both of whom are with the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center. And the bill we're talking about is HB 32, which was introduced by Dallas Rep. Angie Chen Button, and actually is sponsored by El Paso Rep. And Democrat Joe Moody. This is a bill that ostensibly is designed to mitigate people's ability to squat on property, real estate squatters, the way it's being pitched. However, it has deep implications for all renters in terms of the way that you might interface with your landlord should there become a difficulty and the landlord wants you out. And so, Mark and Stuart, thanks so much for joining us. Mark, let's start with you. Give us the basics of HB 32 and why renters should be concerned about it.
Well, this bill effectively removes current due process rights and constitutional due process rights for tenants by including a summary disposition provision that allows a landlord to evict a tenant without a trial. In as quick as 10 days for non-payment of rent cases and as quick as 7 days for other cases.
Tell us how that differs from how things work right now. Should you get into a scrape with your landlord right at the moment, how would this bill change that situation specifically?
Yeah, so under current law, the landlord's supposed to give a 3-day notice to vacate. After that 3 days expires, then they can file the lawsuit in the eviction court. It is by statute set for a hearing between 10 and 21 days. And then after that hearing, if you were evicted, you still have a right to appeal that case. So generally, it takes about a month, which gives people some time to either find some money or borrow from family or friends, or if even a worst case scenario, have a soft landing by being able to put their things in storage or someone's garage,
right, and
find a couch to sleep on.
Stuart, tell us about how this bill, as we said before, is being framed by the people that are trying to press it through, and how that's clearly different from what its actual intent is.
Well, you nailed it in your opener, right? This has been pitched by the Apartment Association to a bipartisan audience of both Democrats and Republicans as a quote-unquote squatter bill, which is simply untrue. It impacts every single renter in this state, because every single renter in the state is subject to the state laws that govern the eviction process. That means every single person that might make one mistake or not even make a mistake is subject to this new law that means that you can be put out on the streets within 6 days of making that mistake, which is, again, inherently unconstitutional.
And, while we're saying all of this and at such an alarming degree of change for, as we've said, over half of Texas adults are renters, Texas families, fewer than half of us actually own our homes, which might be a surprising fact, but that is true. So this affects, millions of people very, very directly. Talk about the process that's happening even as we speak. You guys are at the Capitol. With HB 32, it's in process today. Talk about the timeline. Let's go back to you, Mark. Tell us about the timeline of the bill as it stands now and what's coming up for it.
This bill is moving extremely fast. It was just filed a week ago last Thursday. It already has a hearing today, which is pretty quick. We have had lots of conversations with representatives around the Capitol, and I think we've made clear that there are some very serious problems with this bill. We don't expect that this bill will make it out of committee today. We understand there is a committee substitute that is in process. And in fact, we do have some meetings with the apartment associations after this hearing to discuss what those might be, which I think will depend largely on the temperature of this committee and what they think of it during testimony this afternoon.
We note in looking at the particulars of the bill, Stuart, that there is one Democrat who has signed on here, and that's Joe Moody out of El Paso. Do you know much about why he would have chosen to sign on to this? And can you say anything more about his involvement?
We really don't, right? And look, I've been a fan of Joe Moody for a long time. I think he's done some tremendous work here in the Capitol.
Me too, for sure.
And I think anyone who follows progressive policies and politics in Texas understands that as well. He's been an ally in several different ways to several different groups, right? I think, unfortunately, just like the Republicans on this, he was given some information that was incorrect about what the actual intent of this bill was. I think they were given information. In fact, I've seen what everyone's been given that this would address a very small subset of people who are taking advantage of properties that were vacant at the time. Again, a very, very small subset. We've represented in DEAC over 10,000 people in the past 3 years. I can say that we've seen less than maybe 10 people that are legitimate squatters in that time.
Right.
This bill does not address that. This bill impacts every single person. And I unfortunately just think that these representatives were misled by big interest groups here in Texas. If I can, I'd like to point out some context, if that's okay.
Sure.
So one thing that's really important to understand about the state of law now in Texas, this is before this bill even goes into law, if it does go into law in its current state, is that if you miss your rent by 1 cent or by 1 second, the landlord can start the eviction process and legally obtain a judgment. Just 2 years ago, I saw an eviction in Dallas County for 47 cents.
Wow.
So if this law were to go into effect, that family that was evicted for 47 cents would have been evicted in about 6 to 7 days. Again, for 47 cents. And so this law doesn't change anything about what the landlord can or cannot do when it comes to enforcing the lease. But what it does change is how quickly people are actually forcibly removed from their home.
Right, right. So you're going, in theory, or definitely, in possibility from, a nice apartment where you've lived for years, something goes wrong, your check's a little bit late, and 1 week later you're on the street, literally.
And that's exactly right. And what's odd about this law is that it actually gives more protections to people who don't pay their rent than do. I don't think that was the intent, but it does. It removes the notice provision, the notice protections for people who commit or are alleged to have committed non-monetary breaches. That's going to be your people mostly who are disabled, who have a pet, who elderly people who maybe can't pick up the trash in time. These non-monetary breaches we see all the time in eviction court. All of them, most of them can be pretty benign in nature. But if this law goes into effect, it will impact these non-monetary breaches, and it would allow the landlord to evict somebody without any notice.
Wow. Just insane, really. And interesting, again, this is all happening, at a very rapid pace at a moment when private school vouchers have kind of dominated the conversation around Texas politics for the moment. Tell us, Mark, going back to you, we know it was filed by Angie Chen Button, but, kind of maybe following who's really interested here, where would we source back to the original, origin of this type of legislation?
I mean, you can look directly to the Texas Apartment Association. It's no secret that they drafted this bill, and they are the ones that are pushing it forward. There's been a lot of discussion over the last year in both the Senate and the House about squatters, which, is, I suppose, just good strategy if you're trying to push through a comprehensive eviction reform bill to get everyone talking about squatters and make people think that's what it's about. And that's what has been happening. This whole squatter discussion has just been a ruse. It's a Trojan horse in order to remove due process rights for regular tenants all across the state. And we now know that to be a fact because it is written in the bill.
Very good. Stuart, any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, I want Democrats across the state, even if you're not a Democrat, if you're just someone who favors the rule of law, which any reasonable person should. This
seems very bipartisan to me. This seems very nonpartisan to me. This is everybody that's affected by this.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's clearly very top down. It's clearly an empowerment of the owners of property versus the renters of property. This is something that really anybody who sees the justice or the injustice in that should absolutely take action and get in touch with your representatives. In Austin, I'd say especially if you happen to live in Angie Chen Button's district or if you happen to live in Joe Moody's district, really anywhere that you might be, if you're a renter, you are at risk from this legislation. It's HB 32 again. Mark Melton and Stuart Campbell are with the Dallas Eviction Advocacy Center. Guys, thanks so much for the hard work you're doing there at the Capitol, and we'll keep up with the progress of this situation.
All right. Thanks, Chris.